news, and
Good
how
morning.
can we get some of that food that you've been giving out?
Santita, Great Central Church, 10216 South Kitchener Street, Westchester, Illinois. We are honored and for every Tuesday from 5 till 7, we give out food to the 8 different townships, 8 different communities on Tuesday from 5 till 7. And then on Wednesdays, we do seniors, so they will not come out on Tuesday evenings. And we had a full day on yesterday. Oh, my goodness, we were blessed to have a whole lot of volunteers, which we need all the time. But it's such a pleasure in serving people. Santita, I get joy out of serving people. I do. I think I'm getting more joy with the food pantry than I have in concerts as we go. Although it's fulfilling, I'm enjoying seeing people being served, not just fed spiritually, but naturally. Indeed, I got to run now because I'm you done got me late. Okay. The word today is First Timothy. Take heed unto thyself. First Timothy 4:16. Bless my heart on a Sunday. Take heed unto thyself. Pay close attention to yourself and unto the doctrines or the things that you have learned or have been taught. For in doing this, Santita, I'm going to run. Thou shalt save both yourself and the people that hear you. Santita, I'm going to use for a short thought, navigating better what my attention is on. Navigating better what my attention is on. Santita, whenever we are utilizing God's word, it's always in spirit and in truth. And they that worship me must worship me in spirit and in truth. This is only in and through the word of God. You can only deal with God from your heart. It's not a head matter. It is a sacred place and an honest place that you can honestly deal with God daily. He takes the things out of your hands and you puts it in his, not from your head. When you don't utilize God's word from your heart, it doesn't affect at all God's outcome. It only affects you. God's plan is already scripted. Santita is like a trade. A trade should not be only about money. When you do it, it should be about it being necessary to accomplish what one's desire is in context, prayerfully, of serving people, Santita. And this is what a lot of people don't get it. Your continued understanding of how God wants you is important. I don't teach problems. I teach concerns, solutions, goals, so that you can have an understanding that everything we do, there's an answer to it. And as I run on to a close, Santita, I want to leave everybody with this. It doesn't matter what your attention is on. It doesn't matter what's going on, not your current situation, not his past, and even not your present to this fact. I want to close and leave this with you. When your attention is on God, when you position and navigate your attention correctly, all of the lies, all of the games, all of the manipulation, though they appear to be impressive, God will prove them all to be false and untrue. Keep your attention in and on God's word.
Amen to that. Stay focused, everybody. Stay focused. Again, how can we worship with you? How can we worship with you on Sundays?
Sunday, Great Central Church, 10216 South Kitchener Street, Westchester, Illinois, from 10 till noon. From 10 till noon, we are in service. And y'all, it's a relative word, real, no church stuff, but stuff you can use. God has given me. I got to make sure everybody that come to church can use the word for their own address. That's what I love about God working in our life. Great Central Church, 10216 South Kitchener Street, Westchester, Illinois, from 10:30 till noon. Prayerfully, we'll see you worshiping with us.
And of course, for the Tommies, what is your website, Pastor?
Tommy'sReunion.com. We are in Detroit for Pastor Kinlock, 40,000 membership, doing all 4 of his services. We are back on the road, 150 concerts next year. The Thompson Community Singers, now the Tommy's Reunion, available to you, safe in his arms for the good of them all over the country again. God is doing it again. Kind of sort of like a replica in Santita Jackson, you know.
Bless your
heart.
No,
it's so too much. No, her dad has accomplished so much, and the work is still being done. Santita Jackson Morning Show. Same thing with Milton Bronson, and I'm not his son, but I was a part of his life for the music, and so it's continuing and doing amazing, just like you.
Yep. Well, you know, we build. We build. Sending you so much love, Pastor Darius Brooks. We have got Dr. Shanina Knighton with us today. Dr. Knighton, sending you so much love today. Absolutely. What's on your mind today, Dr. Knighton?
Good morning, Santita, and good morning, Pastor Brooks. And thank you. I needed that word, attention and focus. So
Amen.
thank you for that today. So I actually want to take time to talk a little bit about long COVID, but also just talking about staying ready so you don't have to get ready.
Mm.
And this is more so us still thinking about the long-term effects that are associated with COVID. So the thing is we may not be hearing it in the news as much, and it may not be a popular thing, but it's still here. It's still here, and it still has side effects. And so one of the things that always concerns me is that, you know, I always have this thing where I'm thankful for, let's say, my brain, right? I'm thankful for the ability to be able to think. But it's very challenging to think when you have brain fog.
Mm.
Brain fog has recently been associated with low serotonin levels, okay? Serotonin is responsible for a lot of things. It's responsible for your mood. It's responsible for, when I say your mood, we're talking about depression. We're talking about memory. We're talking about a lot of physiological processes, including vomiting, okay, or when your vessels need to get smaller because, let's say, or constrict because, let's say, it's maybe cold outside. Learning, like mood, it does so much. And when you hear people say, since I had COVID, I've been having a hard time focusing, this is a real thing. And so the thing is that would be the problem. So, of course, it's always easy to talk about the problem. But questions would be, it's like, how do you increase your serotonin levels? So, one, getting more sunlight is going to be an option in terms of something that's helpful. Getting more exercise and working on ways to lower your stress would be another. There are also about maybe 9 foods that increase your serotonin levels naturally. That would include poultry. It would include eggs for protein, let's say some salmon or fish. You know, products such as even tofu can do it. Dairy products, nuts and seeds, pineapples, let's say spinach, peanut butter, you know. So there's a numerous amount of foods that are able to do that. And so it's important that we're paying attention to those levels. If individuals have had COVID, it may be worthwhile that when you are seeing your primary, say, hey, I haven't been sleeping well, or I haven't been focused, right? I haven't been able to pay attention. So how do I then make sure that my serotonin levels are where they need to be? This would not be, let's say, a regular lab workup when you would go see your doctor. So this would be something that you would want to be specific about asking, because if it is low, then these are ways for which you can boost it, or even thinking through a supplement that may be able to help you until you get back to your normal levels. And so, again, we talk about brain fog that is associated with COVID. However, talking about solutions and thinking about what is the cause, low serotonin levels, which is associated with COVID-19 and long COVID, could be your reason of having a challenging time focusing, paying attention, suffering from, like, let's say, depression, when it may not necessarily be something that you have. If you're having trouble learning, if you're having trouble being able to, you know, change up your moods and change up being able to learn and have memory, these are some challenges that could ensue, including vomiting, if that's something that you're, you know, challenged with, but don't have a reason for which you should be vomiting. So that will be my word today, Santita,
Big.
as it comes to just staying ready. You don't have to get ready.
No, that's big. Because I know any number of people who have long COVID. You're going to make me get my serotonin levels checked. Yeah, that's what I want to do, because I've had COVID before. And, you know, I've felt well, but, you know, it's just, you always want to know, right? So, hey, everybody, get those serotonin levels checked. Find out. And if they're too low, you can take something. I got about 30 seconds, not even 15 seconds. We can get them changed. Yes.
That's exactly it. Supplements, diet, exercise, lowering your stress levels.
All right, everybody. Dr. Shanina Knighton. Hey, Dr. Nina, Heydrnina. Let's talk about the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson. Who is he? Who is he? And what will be his impact? Back with more of the Santita Jackson Show in just a minute. Hey, sweetie, I'm going through some stuff. So if you, I'm downloading some information. So if that bothers you, I'm sorry about that.
Let me guess. That press.
Yeah, absolutely. Gotta get that going, honey. I love my little chug-a-lug. How you doing?
I'm doing okay. I'm doing okay today.
All right. Okay.
How about you?
Well, I am doing well. I am doing well. Just running this morning. I've got to leave town tomorrow. So I've got a lot of things that I need that I'm looking into. And I've got a speech I'm got to polish up right. And so, I've got any number of things that I'm looking at doing right now, Just one of those days.
I get it.
But how's your family?
So we're doing okay. Long days and long nights, trying to fit a lot into 24 hours, but for the most part, we're doing okay.
Well, you know what they say about having families? The days are long, the years are short.
That is the truth. That is the truth.
I remember when I was on my way to college, the night before my senior prom, my parents brought my dress home and they were in tears. And I was like, God, did one of our grandparents die? Because they were like, they looked crushed. I said, well, what is going on? And my father said, where did all the time go? I was like, huh?
Yeah. I don't blame them because we feel like that about our oldest right now.
I know you do.
Crazy.
That's why I brought it up. I was like, and that was the first time I ever heard that. Yeah, it was the first time I ever heard that. He said, the days are long, but boy, he said, I remember like it was yesterday when we had you.
But it'll make you love on them even more because that's the thing. Like I was already loving on my son before, but he'd be like, Mom, like, leave me alone.
Oh my gosh. I was like,
but it's like I'm already anticipating, he'll be away in college and we preparing and all that other stuff. So yeah, I do agree.
Hard to believe, girl.
Hard
to believe. Bless
and somebody told me it was gonna go fast.
And see, you're about the same age as my parents. When I went away to college, my mother was 37. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah. I mean, looking back, I'm like, they were so young. And boy, oh boy, I just look up and my brother Yusef's son.
Hi, Miss Jackson.
Yes.
We have Dwight McKee here. I'm still working on getting Reverend Dr. Yuri, and we are back in 30 seconds.
Thank you so much. Oh, you can say hello to Dwight McKee. I got 15 seconds, Dwight.
How you doing, Doc?
Good.
How you doing today?
I'm doing pretty good.
How about you?
I'm okay. Looking forward to hearing what y'all talking about.
Well, I'm going to start with
You always give such good information,
Stand
Doc.
by. Coming in.
Thank you.
Stand by.
Okay, thank you.
We can change the world, change the world, change the world. Oh, yes, we can. We can change the world, we can change the world, change the world.
This is the Santita Jackson Show.
War and hate to a place of love. It's not too late. Gotta save the children. We can't wait. Let's change the world. I am
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Santita Jackson Show. We've got a lot to talk about today. We have a new Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson. Can't wait to talk about him and how he will impact American politics. And we have got the walls closing in on Donald Trump legally. You've had his two of his most prominent lawyers plead guilty. You have his chief of staff who's accepted a plea deal, ostensibly. And even as those walls close in, all of the persons who were offered up to run as speaker and become speaker, it was only his people who got closest. And indeed, it is one of his staunchest allies who is now the speaker, Mike Johnson from Louisiana. This is the Santita Jackson Show on WCPT 820, the nation's largest progressive talk radio station, and AM 950 radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. Meet my morning stars over here. Hey, everybody, on the Santita Jackson Show YouTube channel. Hey, everybody. We're going to be talking about the Middle East too, because now the only thing that could kick the Middle East off, Gaza in particular, off of the headlines. Well, it's now this shooting in Maine. And this is just as we were beginning to look at the dire situation in Gaza. Don't forget that, because we will be circling back to that. Indeed, Doctors Without Borders said they have never seen anything like this in their 80 years. They've never seen anything like this. Raw sewage spilling into the streets. And in fact, the head of Al Jazeera in Gaza, as he was doing his reporting, Dwight McKee, and Dr. Knighton is still listening in, as he was doing his reporting, he found out that his whole immediate family had been wiped out. You see a photo of him embracing his son who was on a stretcher. His whole immediate family killed by an airstrike. They had evacuated their home. They went to the camp that they were told to go to, and the camp was struck by an airstrike. Oh, you can't make this up. In the meantime, up in Maine, in Lewiston, Maine, you have got an Army reservist, Mr. Card, 40 years of age, who killed at least 16 people. He went to a bowling alley and a restaurant. So people are trying to figure that out. So we got to talk about that and all of this violence in the culture. Yeah, we got a lot to talk about on the Santita Jackson Show today. And then the tie between war and the economy. Will this war actually, will this potential war in the Middle East, will it be a boost to the economy, or will it be something else? Got a lot of questions for you. I want you to call me at 773-763-9278. 773-763-9278. A whole lot of people tuning in today, and I'm really glad that you're doing it. We've got a lot to talk about. So where do we begin, Dwight? Do you want to start in the United States and then move out to the speaker and then to the Middle East? Where do you want to begin?
Well, we can start with the speaker, because he's a portent of things to come.
How so? And I'm only saying that because let me go back in these comments here, because and let me say hello to Andre and Robert and Linear Bob and Jewel from New York, and Barbara Baker from Oak Park. Tracy said Mike Johnson said at a House Judiciary hearing, and I quote, "If only women were compelled to bring more able-bodied workers into the world, Republicans wouldn't need to slash Social Security and Medicare." He is anti-abortion, close quote. And he is anti-abortion. And so his point is, if we stop having so many abortions, you would actually have more workers. And she said, so what his election means is not a question. But I think it is a question, because he does portend something. Don't you think? That's what you just said.
Yeah, it is. And what it does is it really tells you that the country is going to the right. at least the Republicans are going to the right. He is more right than Trump. And is really locked into the evangelical community, which is, the most populous part of the country and the most conservative part of the country. And that's kind of his crowd. And so he's going to take the country further to the right. And all of those, what we thought were fringe issues back in the day, will now become mainstream and be very hard to compete with on a legislative level. I really think that the Democrats had a poor strategy going into this, and I've been saying this all the time, that this would happen. They did have a chance to keep McCarthy. And even though they say they couldn't trust him, and they were right about that, he was at least flexible on some issues and negotiable on some issues. And they could have worked with that. He had a few enemies on the Republican side that were hard right, but he was flexible in some issues that the Democrats had to deliver upon. But by not supporting him, it gave the Republicans an opportunity to put somebody in office who was further to the right than he or Trump. And it also gave Trump more control of the party because these guys are also Trump's guys. And so I think it was a very poor strategy that the Democrats had in mind. I think they thought somehow they'd be able to get Jeffries in office, and that wasn't going to ever happen. And so we're going to pay a horrible price for it because what they're going to do, what he's going to do is really go after a lot of the social service budget and the Medicare budget and those budgets that poor people depend upon for their subsistence. He's that kind of guy.
Well, actually,
and it's going to be
in furtherance of your point, he is planning to. He has voted to cut trillions, not billions, from Social Security and from Medicaid. And as the Speaker, what is he empowered to do, Dwight?
Empowered to get the legislation to the floor and decide when the decision comes to the floor. And if you have the majority, which he does have, then there's more of an incentive to get your legislation passed. And it can be dire days coming up for everybody who's not already anchored into the upside of the economy. And that's why I say I really have a hard time with the Democrats for allowing this to happen because it did not have to happen. They could have compromised. They could have given McCarthy some votes, enough votes that he could have remained in office.
Call us at 773-763-9278. 773-763-WCPT. What do you think about that? What do you think about what's happening in Gaza? What do you think about what's happening in Maine? There's so much going on. Will a war in the Middle East help boost the American economy? Got a lot to talk about. We're going to have Dr. Max Wolf on with us today, but I want to hear from everybody. Call me at 773-763-9278. Reverend Dr. Todd Geary, Esquire, National Leadership Team, Rainbow Push, Senior Pastor of Douglas Memorial Community Church in Baltimore, Maryland. What do you make of Mike Johnson, this climate denier, this election denier, this staunch supporter of Donald Trump? Staunch supporter. And I found it quite interesting, Reverend Dr. Geary, that the people who tried to distance themselves from Trump, they didn't have a prayer becoming speaker. But his staunchest allies, and indeed one of his staunchest allies, someone who led the fight to overturn the Electoral College results, he's now the speaker. What does that say?
Well, good morning, Santita, to my big brother Dwight. I think they've fallen off the stool. They've leaned so far right that they've lost their balance, and so that's first, right? But I do think a little differently than what Dwight just said. I think this may be a blessing in disguise because it sets such a stark contrast in terms of policy positions that it doesn't now leave the agenda setting, the politics of the next election, just to whether or not Trump becomes the nominee. That's still got to go through the process. You still have the trials. You have his fear of conviction now that he's got 4 of his quote unquote co-conspirators who've taken deals down in Georgia. That will also feed into the trial in DC. So I think there's enough there that even though it's going to present some formidable headwinds, particularly around the budget, at the end of the day, what's going to come down to whether or not a budget gets passed is compromise. And the compromise comes when, what do I need in those districts for which you may have a Republican representative, but you have Biden who won? And there are enough of those that it puts a big threat to whether or not they're going to maintain the majority after 2024. And so I think Johnson is going to have to figure this thing out. How does he maintain certain positions, but he's still got to hold his caucus together? Because otherwise he's going to be running into some tough votes himself. The fact that he is maybe a little more obvious in terms of his positions than Kevin McCarthy doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to get a change in the net necessity to have to figure out how do you get legislation passed. Now, the one thing I do think that Mike Johnson brings is he's not a dumb guy. He's a constitutional lawyer. He kind of understands some nuances about what some of the legal issues might be. But he also understands a bit about the politics of Louisiana. At the end of the day, if you're going to go after the social safety net with some of the pockets of deeply embedded poverty in the Bayou State, he's going to have to figure out, now that he's the speaker, how does he go back home and look some of the constituents in the face and say, this is the reality, that I'm coming to take your ability to survive and possibly thrive in a tough economy when the world is at war, and those wars are expanding. I think there's some issues he's going to have to figure out. Can he maintain the extreme on behalf of the ideology of a guy that's going down? Now, whether or not he goes to prison, that's a different thing. But when 4 of your folks, you got 4 who have taken the deal, 6 who have a deal that they're considering, and they're all going to testify against you and create a record that's going to be used against you time and again, I think he's got to figure out, does he completely tie himself to the former president, or does he try to carve out a path now that he is the speaker to see how he's going to build his own brand and his own identity? And the only way you're going to do that when you're the Speaker of the House is you got to get legislation through. And most important legislation you got to get through both houses. Though it starts in the House, it's got to go through the Senate. You got to get a budget. You can't send an extreme budget across the campus to the Senate side that even Republicans in the Senate will probably not go with. So you've got to figure this out. And I think he needs to start figuring it out now, because he's got an entire chamber, the entire caucus is on the ballot next year. Can he help Republicans get reelected with an extreme agenda in those moderate districts? Probably not. And that's the biggest threat he's got to think. Does he have political coattails that the caucus can hold on to get the victory, whether or not? Doesn't even matter. Even if Trump doesn't become the nominee or something else happens along the way, it is now Mike Johnson who's definitely holding the gavel. He's got to find out, does he have the political capacity not only to be speaker, but to get other Republicans elected? And I think the jury's going to be out on that.
Everybody calls at 773 763 9278, 773 763 WCPT. I mean, Dwight McKee. What do you think? Why don't you respond to Reverend Dr. Yeary? I mean, because this is happening at a time when Trump's popularity is not waning. It is growing. In fact, it's deepening. The more challenges that he has legally, people are holding on. And, and quite frankly, they're holding on, they're holding out, and they're moving forward. And in fact, it is one of his biggest supporters who's just become the speaker. Your thoughts, Dwight?
Well, I think he does have a brand, Trump's brand. I think that he's a puppet on a string. I think, and Trump is pulling the strings. It's very clear two things happened this week that tells you that. One is that anybody who Trump, when one speaker was up for discussion and Trump said he's a bad guy, it ended the discussion. He was off the map. And secondly, when they asked Johnson, what's your position on if Biden won the election or not? And he said, I'm not going to talk about it. I'm not going to go there. That it's pretty much implicit to say that Trump's position is our position. And so Trump is more in charge of the party now than he was before. I take the position last year about these trials. I say you really don't want to make a monster into a martyr. And that's what has happened. Is Trump has become, because of the partly because of these trials, Trump has become more entrenched as the guy in charge of the party. And secondly, Biden has become weaker. Biden has gone from positive to negative in terms of his support. And what's going to make it worse for Biden is his support of this Israeli war. Because all of the young people, which is the future of the party, are pretty much anti-Biden. And our staunchest position has been with being just totally pro-Israel and not dealing with the Palestinian issue or looking for a ceasefire. And so you got half the country, the young people in the country, now anti-Biden. And his margins were already as such. Is that sufficient enough to take him out of here? So there is a great possibility now that Trump is going to be the president one way or another. Now, legally, they're going to deal with it if he's convicted down in Georgia is another issue. But on the other trials, he can pardon himself if he becomes the president. And I'm sure they're going to work out whatever Georgia is, presuming he's convicted. And I don't think he's going to be convicted down there anyway, because it's going to be hard, to find the political whatever to be able to deal with that. The other thing we have to look at that we also talked about coming into this is it was going to be an upsurge of violence. And I think that what happened in Maine yesterday is indicative of where the country is going. Is that a lot of the violence, and I said it was going to be guerrilla violence. It's not going to be the January 6th kind of violence, the wholesale violence, the riots, and all of that. It's going to be very individualistic. It's going to be very.
I was just simply saying in one place at the Capitol. And you've made the point, I think we've tried to make the point on the show, that this would not, January 6th would not reiterate the same way. It would look different. Your point was it would be guerrilla violence. You think that this is related to that with this gentleman, with Robert Card, 40 years of age, Army reservist, and he's an instructor. We've got an Army vet with us today, Reverend Dr. Uri. He's an instructor, not just on how to use weapons, but on tactics. He knows what he's doing. Dwight.
And you're going to see more of that. It's going to be, there's going to be guerrilla violence from trained military people, and which is going to make it very hard to deal with because it won't be just, random unsophisticated violence. It'll be violence around a plan and people who really have been trained to do this and know what they're doing. And so the country's in trouble. I mean, it's going to be in a lot of trouble, and it's only going to get more intense as these things go along.
Well, Reverend Dr. Uri, what do you say about this Robert Card, an active Army reservist? Now, last year, He had been hospitalized with mental issues. They kill me with these mental issues. Look, mentally ill people hurt themselves. Angry people hurt others. Let's be very clear on that. So putting all of these violent acts on mentally ill people, it's a distraction, and it's just not true. Every psychologist and psychiatrist and mental health professional will tell you that is not how this works. And think about it. Think about it. Think about that woman who, Reverend Dr. Yeri, who drowned her children. When that happened, my mother looked at me sideways. She was horrified. I said, "No, she's angry with her husband." My mother was like, "What? Who would do that?" You know what her husband was doing? This was a woman who had graduated at the top of her high school class at a highly competitive high school in her state. And she was the primary caregiver in her large immediate family. Then she married her husband. She was homeschooling their children. Her husband always berated her because he said, "You don't keep the house clean enough. You're just not enough. You're not doing anything right." Blah blah blah. And he went out to work every day. So when he got the call to come home because something horrible had happened, he was outside being restrained by the police, and all he was doing was berating his wife. That was in the first report. Then after that, they kind of wiped that out. So they need to stop with this lie about mentally ill people committing this violence. These are people who are well and who are angry and who are unbalanced and unhinged because they're so angry. Reverend Dr. Yuri, I got 2 minutes before we go to break.
Well, a couple of things. Number one, there is no automatic assumption that simply because someone may have a behavioral health diagnosis, that they are incapable of forming criminal intent, the mental state necessary to be guilty of a crime. So those two things are not necessarily synonymous, and so we have to keep that in mind. But the other thing is there's this ongoing infatuation with guns in this country. It is still the most curious thing when compared to the rest of the civilized world, not just the industrialized world, is that there's this fear that somehow or other you're going to be able to go into a gun store and buy some over-the-counter weapon that's going to help you defend yourself against the government if the government should decide to come for you. Let's just be real clear. They're not selling stealth weapons in gun stores. They're not selling mortar shells in gun stores. They're not selling military-grade drones in gun stores. So this notion that somehow or other that we have this irrational fear that the government's going to come at us, but they're going to come at us with the same weapons we can go in and buy out of the store is just actually, to use the pun, it's insane. That's where the craziness comes in, that somehow or other, the way we're going to get out of this violent appetite for death and destruction and watching our future get buried before our eyes is going to be by making sure that the Second Amendment allows us to buy more guns. That is the truest definition of insanity. The nation is insane because we're going to keep doing more of the same thing and accept hope for a different outcome. That just doesn't make any sense. So here's what you have: is you have a guy, he may very well have some related combat issue, but what he has is he has a weapon. He has the state of mind to be calculating. He knows exactly what he's doing. It is not because he's mentally ill and random. He is calculating and cold and dangerous at this very moment. And so now you have this issue of what are you going to do once you get him? It's not going to be this argument that somehow or other mental illness made him do it. That's a defense they may try. It's going to be hard to even get that through if they were to, go to trial. The issue is what are you going to do to control the access to guns and the dangerous ammunition that goes in AR-15s? I've said long ago, rather than just go after the guns, go after the ones who make the ammunition that goes in the guns, because the lethality is as much a byproduct of the ammunition as it is a byproduct of the weapon itself. And if we don't have a strategy, we're going to keep seeing these incidents, and there'll be another Vista card coming up somewhere, somehow, at some time in some community in the country. And that is a scary proposition.
Hey, everybody, what do you make of Maine? Because these people are also patriots, according to their reading of the Constitution. Reverend Dr. Yuri and Dwight McKee. Don't tread on me. They feel, and the founding documents give them the right to take it to the government if they don't like it. I don't think we can underestimate this enchantment that some people have with the government. We can't underestimate that. Why did he join the Army Reserves? This is a teacher. Tactics. Showing you how to use the weapon. Military tactics. Wow. And then, of course, what's happening in the Middle East. So we've got Maine, we have what's happening in the Middle East. We have a new speaker. We have Dr. Max Wolf, got Dwight McKee, and Reverend Dr. Erie, and you. Call us at 773-763-9278. Want to hear your thoughts. Whatever they are, you're going to be respected and beloved here on the Santita Jackson Show on Saturday from 2 to 7 at the Rainbow Push headquarters. Come on, let's have some fun for Halloween. Costumes required, everybody. Donations desired. It's going to be fun from 2 to 7 at 930 50th Street. Come on out, everybody. It's going to be great. Back with more of the Santita Jackson Show in just a minute. Ooh, you all keep on talking. We have a lot of people. Somehow or another, my algorithm got back on track this morning. And I don't know what happened, but grateful for it. Maybe because I just started talking so much junk. But anyway, my algorithm being jammed up. But you all keep talking. So, I mean, Dwight, I just came across this article that says that this shows that MAGA is ascendant. Is not falling. MAGA is growing. What do you think? I mean, and Trump said the same thing in his Truth Social post. Dwight?
Is that a question?
Yeah, that is a question.
Yeah, I think that, no doubt about it, that, and it's going to continue to grow, in my opinion.
Why?
And I think because, one is as people become more fearful, they tend to go to the right. And I think people become more fearful. I think, secondly, so many people see on the right sees Trump as a martyr, and it plays into the conspiratorial notions of the government, and it's being, from dark state that is conspiring to take away the democracy by taking away people's options for who they can support for president. Thirdly, as the immigrant crisis become more resolute, white Americans feel more threatened by that, and they think the country has been taken over by people of color from the South, and they find it highly, highly threatening. And they think that that's part of conspiracy by the left and the Democrats to stack the deck for themselves, because they figure that people that come in the country from the South will be Democratic voters in time. And so all of that is driving the country, I think, further to the right, at least the majority of the country, further to the right. And again, also, Biden's position and the United States position on this war in Israel. This Palestinian thing is major in these schools. They are emotionally invested in that, and the country is not handling it right in terms of blackballing these kids for their political positions. They're saying to a lot of these kids that you won't be able to get jobs if you don't support Israel, or you won't be able to get jobs if you have any opposition, or you're going to lose your scholarship. And so that is, patently fascist unto itself. And it reinforces Trump's position that this is, a dictatorship that is a leftist is to the left. That the fascism is coming from the left, not from the right. And it makes them look like heroes and protectors of liberty.
Well, that's why I made the point, Reverend Dr. Uri, that a Robert Card would see himself as a patriot, right? I'm just saying.
Yeah. So here's the thing about this definition of patriotism, right? You have this issue with the government, but you don't confront the government. You go to a diner and a bowling alley.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I think that's the distinction when we talk about patriotism, that the first rule of patriotism is to defend the innocent, not to despise them. And so going after innocent people is not changing the government. What it is it's changing the sentiment of what's happening, because you have so much innocent life being lost at the expense of this notion of having it called patriotism. So I think that's not it's Card's argument, but that's why I think you see so much pushback with folks trying to say he's sick, as opposed to being calculating, because it's hard to have patriotism associated with the loss of innocent life and somehow make that justifiable. So I think the real issue, and it'll be interesting to see what happens with the Second Amendment argument or some sort of gun control. Now that you got a new speaker, it'll be interesting about how the committees, that's the thing I'm interested in watching with Johnson, is what happens with the committees and their power to be able to push some of these agenda items.
What do you think is going to happen? Where do you put your money at this time?
Anything's possible. I think the closer
2 minutes
to the election, we will see whether or not they're going to stay as far to the right as they are now. Once we start recognizing that the House and their survival as individual members of Congress is actually at play. It's one thing to protect Trump. It's another thing to protect yourself. And who's going to be willing to get down? I think a lot of it you'll see after the primary season is over. Once you get past the primary, it's harder for Trump to lean in against you, because now they got to find a way to get to the general election ballot and not the party ballot. So I think some of them will toe the line until you get to late spring. But once you get to May and June, you might begin to see some defectors in terms of the agenda the closer you get to November of 2024.
You know, the only reason I would even have any pushback against that is that people who like Trump really like him. You know, I
don't doubt that.
Yeah,
but when you look at
they like what he is standing for. I don't think that we have ever really wrapped our arms around 2008 and what Goldman Sachs, when they tried to hold up the United States government, how that played in the heartland of the United States. Remember that they shut down the entire communication system
back in 30.
For the for Congress. They even changed the way they receive communications because Americans were so furious. Americans were so infuriated. They were like, wait a minute. Well,
I think elections now are more inconsequential.
Well, hold that thought.
I think now the fight is going to be...
Wait. Hold on. No. So we can get that on the air, okay?
Stand by.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
We can change the world, change the world, change the world. We can change the world, we can change the world, change the world.
This is the Santita Jackson Show.
War and hate to a place of love, it's not too late. Gotta save the children, we can't wait. Let's change the world. I am free.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Santita Jackson Show. Want to hear what your thoughts are today? Call me at 773-763-9278 right here on WCPT 820, the nation's largest progressive talk radio station, and AM 950 radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota, and YouTube. Meet the Morning Stars. Hey, everybody on the Santita Jackson Show YouTube channel. Want to hear your thoughts. We're talking about the main shootings. We're talking about what's happening in Israel and Gaza. We're talking about the new speaker. Indeed, there's a headline, Dwight McKee and Reverend Dr. Todd Yeary, two of my panelists today. We're going to have Dr. Max Wolf on at the bottom of the hour. They said this proves that MAGA is ascendant. MAGA has gone nowhere. In fact, MAGA has grown. In fact, Representative Emmer, when he got a negative tweet on Truth Social from about him from Donald Trump, he was out of the running within hours. So what do you make of that? Call me at 773-763-9278. 773-763 WCPT. Hope to see you on Saturday from 2 to 7 p.m. at 930 50th Street at the Rainbow Push headquarters. Halloween party, costumes required. You must come dressed up for Halloween. Costumes required, donations desired. We're going to have some snicky snacks and a lot of fun. With all this going on, I think it's important for us to get out here and do something nice, have a good time. If you want to, my mother always sets up when we were children, she would have a graveyard for Halloween. We want to bury poverty. We want to bury violence. We want to bury guns. Oh, she's very creative. I'm going to do more of that on Saturday. So I want you to get on over there to 930 50th Street from 2 to 7 on Saturday. Let's get to some of these headlines. At least 16 people were killed in Maine yesterday at a restaurant and a bowling alley in the city of Lewiston, just outside of Portland, Oregon. Dozens were injured. And the death toll, already the largest from a U.S. mass shooting this year, could rise. Police are searching for Army reservist 40-year-old Robert Card. They named him as a person of interest. Of course, he taught tactics. He taught munitions, how to use your weapons. Wow. What happened there? House Republicans finally selected a speaker, Representative Mike Johnson of Louisiana, a solid Trump supporter, someone who is an election denier, someone who led the fight from the House to overturn the Electoral College results throughout the states. Yes, that guy, anti-LGBTQ, and on and on and on and on. He won. What does that mean? What does that mean, everybody? He's a Trump ally, so we're going to see what that means. And Israel said it's getting ready for a ground assault in the Gaza Strip. Prime Minister Netanyahu did not clarify yesterday when it would happen, but the U.S. has asked Israel to delay. In the meantime, the head of Al Jazeera in Gaza had the saddest of stories to report. Indeed, he had to report that his entire immediate family had been killed. Wael al-Dadua learned while reporting on air that his wife, son, daughter, and grandson had been killed in an Israeli airstrike. Now, they had already moved to a camp where they had been told to evacuate their homes. They did that, and then the camp was struck by an airstrike. Wow, everybody. Wow. A New York judge fined Trump $10,000 yesterday for violating a gag order. It was the second time that he broke the rules in his civil trial. Want to know what your thoughts are about that, too? Will he go to jail, everybody? He keeps getting fined. Special counsel Jack Smith urged a judge to tell Trump that he risks going to jail if he keeps talking about witnesses in his federal election obstruction case. The UAW and Ford reached a tentative deal to end the union strike. The UAW workers won a 25% wage increase over a 4.5-year contract and a new starting hourly wage over $28, among other concessions. Members will return to work while they vote on the deal. And for those of you who love onions like I do, dozens of people were sickened with salmonella from tainted onions, everybody. The FDA announced a recall of bagged pre-cut onions from Gill's Onions this week after 73 people and 22 states became ill. Check out those onions, everybody. Get the onions whole and cut them yourself. How about that? Chicago, 67 degrees and rainy today. Minneapolis, St. Paul, 59 degrees and rainy. The World Series begins on Friday. The Diamondbacks versus the Rangers in the NFL. Tonight, the Buccaneers will be playing the Bulls. And in the NBA, the Thunder 124, the Bulls 104. Then the Raptors were triumphant over the Timberwolves 97-94. Let's get to the rest of the show. We have been talking with Dwight McKee, noted social scientist, dean of the Ma'afa Redemption Project here in Chicago, and of course, advisor to Cornel West, who's going to be with us on November 8th. Cannot wait to have Dr. West back. And Reverend Dr. Yeri, National Leadership Team of Rainbow Push, and the senior pastor and he's a practicing lawyer, senior pastor of the Douglas Memorial Community Church in Baltimore. We've been talking about Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the House. We've been talking about what's happened in Gaza. We're talking about this Maine shooting. Wow. So, Dwight McKee, are we reaping the whirlwind with this Maine shooting? I mean, this
I think so.
Okay,
I was
how
going to
so?
make a quick point, and then I get back to that.
Mhm.
Is that I was going to say that the election now is more inconsequential. So it's not going to be, the die is going to be cast with this next budget hearing. That's where the power of the speaker comes in. And that's where the power of the Republicans are going to come in, is that they're going to look at this next budget and force them to cut so much social service substance from out of that budget that the left, some of it's going to be punitive, some is trying to drive quote unquote their agenda, but it's going to be devastating for much of the community that depends on these social services. And so by the time they get to the election, that die would already have been cast.
Well,
because elections are a year out.
Well, to your point from the Common Dreams report, the newly elected, and I read this, the headline is New GOP House Speaker Mike Johnson has proposed trillions of dollars in cuts to Social Security and Medicare. The newly elected Republican Speaker of the U.S. House of Representatives, Mike Johnson, has previously proposed trillions, Dwight, not billions, Reverend Dr. Uri, trillions of dollars in cuts to Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, and suggested that slashing the programs should be the top priority of Congress. And of course, as the Speaker of the House, he has the power to move that legislation to the floor, and the Republicans have the votes. Is that the point you were making, Dwight?
And that's the point I'm making, and he's going to use part of that argument to justify his position on abortion by saying they're forced to slash those budgets because white women are not having enough children to be able to sustain the economy for Medicare, because that budget comes from future, not the past. It's the future taking care of the past. It's how Social Security is set up and Medicare is set up. And so if there is no future, quote unquote, because of abortion, then those who are from the past will have to pay the bulk of the price of that. And so, I mean, a lot of then the other violence, like you see coming out of Maine, will be reactionary violence. It's not just violence based on, being threatened by the what's happening with the political situation or the war situation. Some of that is be violence because they are angry because they feel like they've been used, that they've been misused, that they've been manipulated, and they're angry because they feel like that they had these dreams and precepts of America and got involved in that, dedicated their lives to that, and then discovered that they really wasn't real or it didn't work for them. And now they're just lashing out, killing people because they're angry about their own feelings of being manipulated and deceived.
So you don't see Robert.
This violence is going to be coming from a lot of places, huh?
So you don't see Robert Card. Pardon me I didn't mean to interrupt, but just to amplify your point, you don't see Robert Card as a one-off. I mean, this is someone who he's an Army guy and regarded enough to be an instructor in the Army. I mean, like right now, you see him as an angry person.
A one-off. There has been more violent shootings this year than there have been days in the week. So no, it's not a one-off. This is an everyday thing, and not just in the ghetto, as Donnie said. This is an everyday thing in America, where somebody gets angry and goes shoots 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 people. So this is the new standard. This is who we are as a nation now. This is not an aberration. Not having a day of a shooting now is an aberration.
Reverend Dr. Uri, your thoughts? I mean, what is the connection between, we've had David Swanson on here from War is a Lie, going to the corporate support that pushes these wars, and or corporate needs that push these wars. Because many of these people get over our service persons get overseas and they find out that they're really protecting private mercenaries, and they're protecting American business interests, not American cultural and political interests. What do you make of, I mean, just where we are? I mean, because these persons who commit these atrocities, many of them have military training. I mean, what's going on? What
Well,
happened?
the short version is you don't really know. I mean, that is a question about folks coming with military training, and are there lingering issues depending on whether or not they spent time in combat or whatever the case may be. But I think to Dwight's point, they're angry about something. Now, whether or not they're angry about this or something else, if there's something, we had a judge to be killed at his home in Maryland. Well, what he was mad about was that the judge had ruled against him in court that day, right? Folks get upset about a whole range of things. The whole issue is we do have a problem. One, we have an access to guns problem. Well, that's not going away, right? Because there's this infatuation with the Second Amendment, and there's a profitability that goes in many southern states where you have gun manufacturers. Well, that's not going away, so you got to deal with that. I think the bigger issue comes down to, even if Mike Johnson, in the midst of this policy dispute, right? The disputes that are going to come and the budget's going to be the issue, is you don't pass a budget in one chamber. You got to get it to the Senate, and you got to get the president to sign it. So then you have a different issue. And this is the calculus where Mike Johnson has a problem. Even if he takes his stand and gets a radical budget out of the House, it's never going to get signed by Biden, and they're not going to have the votes to override it in the House, even if the Senate lost its mind and decided to override the president there. So he's got a different calculus. And so he's got to decide whether or not he's going to govern or whether he's going to pander. And if he's in pandering mode, then we're going to get more of the same stuff. But what that's going to lead to is the difficult issue, because the Senate they're holding on to a House bill that has an appropriation attached to it just to be able to amend it and send it back to the House and force his hand. They were going to do it the last time. That's when McCarthy decided they needed to get their budget out, their issue of a continuing resolution, and send it to the Senate, because the Senate was getting ready to send them something they definitely didn't want. And so here's the thing that I think folks have to remember from civics. A bill does not get passed by a singular chamber. A bill's got to pass both houses and be signed by the president or override a veto. That ain't happening with a crazy budget. And if it comes out too extreme with too many severe cuts that go after poor people, what it's going to do is it's going to prove going into the election, and this is where I disagree with Dwight, elections are about self-interest. At the deeper level, folks are going to come back and say, if they're cutting for poor people, in Louisiana's poverty rate is about 20%. That's a whole problem. He's got to go back. These folks have to go back to constituents, and many of them come from poor districts, that at the end of the day, balancing a budget is an interesting soundbite, but who you balance the budget on, that's more particular. And if that then becomes a message that this is a Republican Party that is hostile to the interests of working everyday people, that's going to create, I think, bigger issues, regardless of what, folks think about Trump or anything else. That's what gets folks kind of engaged and motivated. And that's what we have to leverage to get them engaged and motivated, because they're self-interest, not whether or not they like Trump, they don't like Trump. At the end of the day, these folks are passing laws that affect everybody's day-to-day lives. And if we don't pay attention to what's coming out, I think we're going to end up with a pretty serious situation. But I don't think, just from the dynamics on both sides, just because you have a radical in the lower chamber does not mean that Mitch is going to go along with it in the upper chamber, or whoever follows Mitch, if Mitch doesn't stay the minority leader, it's not going to come out and the president's not going to sign it. So then you're going to have a different standoff about what does a continuing resolution look like to keep the government operating. That's where I think the fight's going to be. And I think we'll see it pretty quickly, because you got November 17 is looming. The first test is right here at their doorstep. They'll pass a funding bill to support Israel in the war, but I want to see if they're going to get to a CR that's going to get them past November 17th and a looming shutdown just before Thanksgiving. We're about to see who's got the real kind of influence, of whether or not Mike Johnson is really the speaker, or if he's just a puppet. Now, I think that's going to be interesting. And you know what I always say? I'll share it with Dwight. I keep my popcorn ready because this fight's going to be on.
Dwight, your thoughts?
Well, I think that he makes a brilliant point. I think he really makes a brilliant point about this being people deal with their self-interest. But I also think that he gives a little more, too much credit to poor white people whose fear of not being, fear of non-white people generally overwhelms and overcomes their own understanding of what their self-interest is. So if you look at, like in Virginia, West Virginia, Biden's constituency is the poorest in the country. And yet they on every issue support him when every issue he supports is against their self-interest. Because he knows how to dangle the conservative card and dangle the race card. And he knows how to dangle in front of them their fear of loss of jobs. And the coal industry and those things that ultimately work against them, but he dangles them in such a way as they think it's in their interest to support him. Well, almost everything he supports is against their interest. And I think that's how most of the country functions, that they, particularly poor people in the South, particularly poor white people in the South, who tend to be more preoccupied with the migrant issue than they are about Social Security, more preoccupied about, blacks being in charge than them eating every day, being more involved in America being the dominant world power than, them being able to go to the hospital every week. It's how they pretty much have been raised and conditioned. And so they are much more prone to manipulation by propaganda than they are to understand how their own self-interest fit with the facts and reality. At least that's what I've seen.
How do you see this playing out in election 2024? I mean, because the corporate media continue to sound the death knell for Donald Trump, and I just don't see the evidence of that. Reverend Dr. Yuri?
I think it'll be more Republican. Oh, I'm sorry. No, Yuri go. Go ahead, Yuri.
Well, I think there are two distinctions, right? There's Trumpism, and then there's Trump. Right now, they're synonymous with one another because he's still actively engaged. So how deep the ideology of a Trump has penetrated the Republican Party, that might linger long past whether or not Trump is actually a player in the political process. I think Dwight said Biden is dangling something. I don't know if you meant Manchin at that point, in terms of Joe Manchin, in terms of West Virginia and how he's been able to play that card against their self-interest. And I do agree with that. He has been the foil inside the Democratic Party. And I think the reason he kind of came Democrat in the first place is, remember, Byrd, the longest serving senator at the time that he left the Senate, had been a long-standing Democrat, never changed parties, and then became somehow the darling of political longevity. I still think, though, that when you start looking at this next election, and Santita, you asked the question about whether or not these wars will stimulate the American economy. The last time we were in this position asking this question, George H.W. Bush was the president. The economy was bad. You had the issues with the invasion by Iraq, and the first Gulf War was expected that it was going to generate this revenue, and the economy never recovered. And then he ended up kind of grasping at a straw. He introduced NAFTA going into that next election. That didn't take hold, and what you ended up with is that's when Bill Clinton comes in. I think that's the issue that Biden's got to wrestle with. If this does not address the economy, if the economy does not get stronger, independent of anything else that's going on ideologically in the chambers, Biden's going to have a problem. and just talking about the things he's accomplished without folks being able to feel like they're from Missouri, as they say, show me. If they haven't seen anything, I think they will either vote with the opposition or they'll vote with just kind of sitting out and letting the chips fall where they may. I think this is really the opportunity where you're going to see the battle lines are about to be drawn politically and ideologically around everything from the budget to how we approach war, to what are some of the social issues, and the distinction to actually the contrast. If I am Hakeem Jeffries, I'm loving it because Mike Johnson is such a stark contrast to me. I can delineate where my policy issues are. It may be a tough slog, but you want folks to be able to tell the difference between this and that so that they don't end up taking this or that and coming away with neither.
Well, we'll see. I just don't see people voting for Hakeem Jeffries as supportive as I am of him. If this is, since 2008, when the back of the economy was broken by Goldman Sachs, there has been an anger out here. The Tea Party came out of it. There's been an anger out here that has not been addressed, at least not by Democrats. Using fear tactics and saying blue no matter who, you need to be frightened of Trump, that's not working. It is certainly not working with these young people who have gone on with Robert Kennedy. They've gone on with Cornel West. They have gone on about their business. They're not even paying attention to the two-party system because they call it the uni-party. One party with two different ways. You know, a lot going on here. So we've got Dr. Max Wolf joining us in just a few minutes right here on the Santita Jackson Show. And I want you both to speak to what Karen Lene asked. She said Trump's popularity will continue to escalate as facts about his wrongs are minimized and Biden's perceived wrongs are maximized. What do you think about that? Back in just a minute. So what do you think about that? Do you think that Biden's flaws have been maximized and Trump's have been minimized? Dwight?
I think it's just the opposite. I think Biden's flaws have been minimized, and Trump is on trial for four different trials.
I mean,
how much more maximization can that happen in terms of your flaws and your behavior? And so they don't put him on. They can't put him in another trial because there's not that much time in the year. They just run out of time for him to go on trial. I think
we have Dr. Wolf on the line.
One of the best things that happened for Biden, as Providence would have it, is that at the point where they were trying to raise questions and put him on impeachment and started having these impeachment hearings, the Israeli war broke out. And so that's off of the radar now and not covered by the media now. It's almost become a non-issue. So I think it's just the opposite. I'm like Yuri in this. I think that Trump is a part of this, but it's also bigger than Trump. It's Trumpism. And as these fears increase on the right, and people see themselves losing control of their lives as they become more intense, Trumpism intensifies. And people are looking for, the kind of leadership that can return them back to the old days of perceived stability, false stability, but at least perceived stability. And also, it's going to be this angry reaction to people's lives have been out of control, as you saw last night with these shootings. I think it's going to go both ways.
2 minutes.
For the country.
We've got Dr. Max Wolf with us. Dr. Wolf, my brother Jonathan said his throwaway thoughts are so brilliant. He said you could just sit and listen to Max all day and all night long. Dr. Wolf.
Thank you. Very kind praise of him. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Well, always have to get you. I'm just sorry I was so late reaching out to you yesterday. I've had a crazy week. But I'm so glad you're here. Reverend Dr. Yuri, everyone just loves to, we just love to hear What you gonna say? What you gonna say? What you gonna say? We've got these wars. You got the economy.
I never know what's coming either.
I know on this show. Oh,
Yeah,
look.
on anything, That's what keeps it. That's the mystery to keeping it mysterious.
Yeah.
Having no idea what you'll say next yourself.
Yeah. You know, Max, every day. I mean, just as I'm about to go to bed, I hear about this man shooting up all these people in Maine. And this poor gentleman said, Mainers don't do this. I'm like, don't tread on me. Come on, New England. Come on. This is how you get down. Sedition. But this is still horrible. It's horrifying. I mean, these people are having to shelter in place in Lewiston. It's awful.
Yeah.
But
unfortunately, I think this is a kind of phenomenon that's very much everywhere, every town at this point, right? So I don't think anyone who's out there comforting themselves that it could never happen where they live, I certainly hope you're right, but recent history would beg to differ. So obviously, I think this is a fairly small community too, so I don't think we're talking about big cities. Maybe a more interesting topic that we don't seem to ever pick up on, but these things which we've had a suburbanization of a lot of violence over the last bunch of years.
Well, that's a heck of a point.
Yeah.
Wait a minute, Dwight. Dwight and Reverend Year, you want to say hello to? I was about to call him Donald Trump.
Stand by,
Please
about to come
forgive
back.
me.
That's a tough one.
How you doing,
Looks like you're not down with my new haircut. Huh?
This is the Santita Jackson Show.
Maybe the red was a bad idea.
Stay right there. And hush. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Santita Jackson Show, WCPT 820, the nation's largest progressive talk radio station. I'm so glad that somehow the algorithm is writing itself. We got a lot of people tuning in this morning. Everybody, please like and share the show. Like and share the show. Hope you'll return tomorrow, and I hope you'll be able to get through tomorrow. That's been a problem. 773-763-9278. If you want to talk about what happened in Maine, what's happening in Maine, looking for this Army reservist who's killed all of these people and injured scores of others. What's happening with this new Speaker of the House? What will he do? He has a record, unlike Jim Jordan. He has a record. I mean, Jim Jordan had a record, but no legislation. He has stood firm on legislation and on a record. So we want to know who he is. And of course, what's happening in the Middle East. You know what time it is. It's Thursday, bottom of the hour. At the bottom of the second hour, Dr. D and Reverend Yeary. Of course, we have Dr. Max Wolf with us today. Always a pleasure to have you. Where do you want to go today? There's just so much to talk about. I mean, people are sheltering in place in Maine, trying not to get shot by one of their a member of their community. Wow.
Yeah, all too familiar, and looks like this is a particularly bad episode with a lot of people injured, and it looks like maybe some of the news reports, and obviously, hopefully they're not always correct on this stuff, but some of the news reports sort of estimating 20 plus fatalities, which would make this one of the most intense recent episodes. So obviously, terrifying situation there. And as you said earlier on, I don't think it's unique to Maine or to Lewiston or to one region or one group of folks. It does seem to be kind of par for the course. And it does make me think we really have seen a scale up in this suburban violence. And I wonder to what extent we don't talk about that because we're too busy talking about the increase in urban violence, even though it ended and went into reverse a year ago, although still alarming, and not to say it's not an issue, but it's actually been coming down. The suburbanization has been more consistently going up, but you wouldn't necessarily know it from the popular discussion. And probably the real take-home message is violence and gun violence are not unique to any one area of the country or any one demographic. They're as American as apple pie at this point. So, I mean, that does seem like a pretty substantial issue to handle. I think we found a new leadership in the House announced recently, which is it's good to have some leadership, I suppose. I guess it's an anticlimactic moment because you think if you search this much and this hard, maybe you come up with something really different. but apparently not. But, proof is in the pudding. We'll see how Ms. Johnson's leadership works itself out. I was a little dismayed to see that he voted to not certify an election. Seems like a mediocre qualification to be in the election business, but we'll hope for the best.
Well, I mean, when you look at that, anyone who appeared to, well, not who appeared, but anyone who went against Trump couldn't get close to the speakership. And he's closer than, two coats of wet paint to Trump. I mean, he sponsored the bill to overturn
But is the
the
leadership
electoral college
qualification?
results. I'm sorry?
Sure, but that just means the leadership qualification for the Republican Party is loyalty to the former president during his trials. Even if you tell a lie that challenges the U.S. Constitution, that's uncomfortable, I think, for a lot of folks.
Well, we will see. So I want to ask you, something popped into my mind just before, early this morning, I'm up rather early. When you look at war and how it can kickstart the economy, I want to circle back to that. Americans are struggling. I don't, and Janet Yellen said, well, actually, we can afford these wars in Ukraine and Israel at the same time. I was like, really? Okay. I don't know how that's going to work, but do we need this to kickstart the economy or to help us to make money?
Yeah, so I know Americans often think this, right? But this is like that personality question they ask people. Do you want to attend a party or throw a party? Our association with wars being good for us comes from World War I and World War II, where we got to visit the wars late with less death toll than most of our competitors, and we didn't have to host them. So hosting a war destroys your economy and your productive capacity, sometimes forever, right? So I don't know how up on each day's development everyone is, but if you look at what has happened in Gaza, and again, I'm not trying to be callous to the human toll, which I know is very large, right? So thousands of people, including women and children, killed and injured, and I'm not trying to make light of that. But probably a third to 50% of the economic capacity has been bombed out of existence there. Right? So I think you got to be real careful with this association that people make that wars are good for the economy. Right? Wars can be good for the economy if you win and you don't host them. But those are kind of big caveats. Right? And two, historically in the U.S., wars have also been the handmaiden of bad episodes of inflation. I realize it's news that was more dominant a few months back, but we're still wrestling with inflation here, if less acutely than we were a year ago. Wars tend to be inflationary. And I think what Yellen meant, because she's a good economist, but maybe wasn't thinking through all the ways that could be interpreted, was we have seen a lot of conversation from some parties about how expensive, how much money we spend on this or that, sometimes Ukraine, for instance. And I think she's just doing her job and competent. And if you know the numbers, that's kind of her job to know the numbers of what America collects and what America spends. These are bizarre conversations because there are people who won't rediscuss a $1.3 trillion tax cut, but are worried about a $40 billion spend on support to the Ukraine as though it's a dollars issue. Just so you understand, because and not to belittle anyone, $1 trillion is 1,000 billion, right? So if you're spending way less than 1% of a budget on something, and then everyone gets hot and bothered, so they vote for the 99-cent spend, but the 1 penny, they just draw their line in the sand and have a temper tantrum. If you're a number person, it's hard to countenance that. There's all kinds of meetings and ideas of what people should spend on, right? But we all have friends who never get to drink when they go out to dinner 3 times a week because they're watching their budget, right? And that person who's watching their budget, right? They're just not getting a drink and they want to go out to dinner 3 times a week and then tell everyone they're frugal, right? And so if you're a numbers person, it's hard not to mention, hey, the $7 you saved this week on Diet Coke might have been offset by the $93 that you spent on the meal. Only that's less true.
But see,
in this case.
the
No.
challenge is, a person, just the average citizen, when you see $100 billion being pulled out of thin air for Ukraine and Israel, and they're going to throw Yemen in there, just to kind of spice it up a little bit, and a few other things. And you are struggling from day to day. When you are denied that $1,200 or $1,400 check, which kind of gets you over the hump from the government, when your child does not have a computer, when there is so much want and need in America, the richest country in the world, when you drive down the street, you go bump, 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 because the streets are a mess. And when you look at people not having access to health care, to the best health care, because they cannot afford it, and on and on and on, something's way off here. There's a real disconnect because the government can find money for war. Summer Lee just talked about this, the newly minted congresswoman. We can find money for war, but not for the poor, and certainly not even for working people. I mean, so Janet Yellen, God bless her, but poof on her and these numbers. I get numbers, but the human element is missing here, Max. It's missing.
But it always is. So yes, true, but I wouldn't single her out, right? But yeah, this is.
But I am. I'm only doing it for the sake
Okay.
of this conversation. I mean, she's a perfectly nice woman. I've met her a few times. Very nice, but we're talking about policy, right? So this is not a personal attack. I'm looking at her on policy and what people are feeling out here in these streets.
I don't think you're attacking her personal or otherwise. All I would say is I think that what I don't like about those conversations is I think magnitude matters in what we spend on, because magnitude, and again, maybe too many years in technical work, but magnitude to me translates to priority, right? So if you're going to spend $1 trillion a year on defense, right, and we roughly do, then that's just you have to understand that's a big priority, right? And that's what that statement is. If you're going to cut back the checks to people, I think the more interesting message is this. If you're cutting back those emergency pandemic assistance checks, you're doing that to force people back to work, or because you don't believe in helping low-income people, or you think it's your fault if you're poor. It's not for the budget. It's not that relevant for the budget. I know people get upset when you say that because they're told they're being denied their money because it's too expensive, but it just isn't. See, the problem is it's easy when people do this all the time these days. It's easy to say, I don't believe the authorities here and there, and then take as given what the authorities told you somewhere else, right? I understand that. We all do that to some extent, right? But like, if things are a bit rotten, I think they might be here, then you got to kind of start with like, why am I being told that? Right? It's annoying, and it's hard not to import this into your personal life where it's definitely not appreciated. But you get into this habit, or at least I did. Some of us did, I think, where when someone tells you something, you think, that's interesting. Why would you want me to believe that? I make zero assumptions, as best I can, that it's true or false. I would more start with, why do you want me to think that's true? Right? And then if I'm real interested, I'll check into it. And sometimes it's true, and I've learned something, and I'll listen more closely next time. And sometimes it's false, and I'll try to figure out if they knew it was false and they shared it with me, or if they just repeated something from someone else that they didn't worry about too much. Right? So I think it sort of depends on how you see it. I think the bigger issue to me, and this is what a long-winded way of getting at it, is this. If we didn't give the money to Ukraine, you sure as hell wouldn't be getting any help either. Right? It's not like that money was going to go to you.
True.
Right? So it's not going to go to Ukraine. And when we give $1 to Ukraine, 70 cents of it's going to end up going to American arms manufacturers. And it's basically saying, hey, our biggest military rival historically is Russia. You guys are going to fight and die, and we're going to give you $1 to buy 65 to 70 cents worth of stuff from us to go do that. And we do that for a lot of reasons, but reasonably enough, you don't want to fight Russia. And the Europeans aren't in a position to defend themselves the way you'd want them to be, perhaps. And then we have big business interests there. So I guess the way I see it is people who are up nights worried about how generous Uncle Sam is to someone else don't know much about their uncle.
Well, I don't know if they're worried. I don't know if that's the concern as much as they're concerned about how stingy Uncle Sam is to them. Like, I mean,
Fair enough.
War for the money for war, but none for the poor. That's the problem. And then on top of that, when you see money just being shoveled to Ukraine, money being shoveled to Israel, they get their money off the top. But I have to fight for Medicare and Medicaid. I now have a Speaker of the House who wants to cut trillions, thousands of billions of dollars from Social Security, Medicaid, Medicare. That is what he is aiming to do. And as the Speaker of the House, he has the power to move the legislation to the House, and he has the votes to take it through. That's a problem.
Yeah.
That's a problem. So when you come to me with tears in your eyes about something that's happening over yonder, when I can't get any help right here, that's a problem. And I think we need to deal with that because Americans are generous, in the abstract and actually. But the problem is now Americans are stepping over people literally on their front door who are getting thousands of dollars to get resettled here. And, and you still haven't given Black folks reparations, having stolen their physical labor for centuries. It's not working. You ain't held a treaty, not you, but we have not honored a treaty with indigenous people whose land we have stolen. All this stuff that was, Dr. Wolf, is no more. People are looking at the world through a very different lens. So yeah,
Sure.
people are going to question, people, and they should question, what the hell is my money going to Ukraine for? For what? Why?
They should, but they'll also immediately quit. That is still divide and conquer, right? And if you think like, hey, that's how we got here, right?
When you won't even let Black folks on the bus to get out of Ukraine. Because see, let me tell you, that was a big problem now. They kind of hurt themselves with Black people in America on that piece. Yeah.
Look, I think there were lots of mistakes were made, right?
That was a huge one.
And they always do make a lot of mistakes. My point is, a lot of the country has gone down that rabbit hole, and they think, hey, why does that guy get to go to college? Why does somebody get to see a doctor when they're in prison? Why are they fixing this guy's roads? Right? I guess the maybe delusion, the idea in my head is, let's talk about what our priorities are and spend accordingly. So roads, schools, healthcare, retraining when you lose your job, whatever's on your list, right? Let's bring our lists. Let's have the easy time of agreeing to the stuff that's high on everyone's list. And then let's struggle through to get as much as we can of everyone's stuff on the list. Because otherwise, the one-offs, they lead to a weird zero-sum game for people where they make this mistake of thinking, hey, if the government didn't spend, this money resettling people from El Salvador, I'd get it. And I always ask people to say, well, were you getting it before they did that? Okay. Were you getting that money after they stopped doing that? You weren't, right? Which means you may or may not think that that's the right priority. And I might agree with you, right, on that. But there's a bigger issue here, which is what you fund and what you don't, right? And right now, we have this weird standoff that's gone a long time, which is the Republican Party has done quite well with tax cuts, popular with wealthy people. That's now very important because Congress people spend, especially in the House, more time fundraising often than legislating. It's not their fault. It's the nature of the business they're in, right? And the Senate, they have a little bit of a reprieve on that because they have elections a little bit less frequent, but not much. Governors and town hall folks and state senators and state reps, they all kind of live by that sword and die by that sword. And so it's been a real good time to be wealthy and have your restrictions cut and your taxes cut. And they kind of got the majority of Americans to go along with wedge issues and ignorance and distractions, but they can't really do it much more because, see, we reached this weird problem where we borrowed a ton of money because rich people gave money to pay less taxes and big companies gave money to pay less taxes. And now the inequality is such that they earn all the income. So we can't even do the stuff we used to do, which probably wasn't adequate, unless either they start paying taxes or we figure out how to cut a whole lot of the stuff we used to think was bedrock.
Well, what is the solution?
And that's what
what do Americans need to do instead of, as we look at the Venezuelans, the people from South and Central America, but that's not the first thing you look at. I mean, folks are just upset about not getting their fair share first. And then you add on to that other people who come in and who might get a little help. you can add on to that.
Yeah.
Then you look at the wars. I mean, these things are, this is secondary, tertiary stuff. What's primary is I can't eat. What's primary is my public school is not working for my child. The public housing that I'm in does not function, and yet I'm going to work every day. I mean, so what is the answer as we move into election 2024?
Yeah, I do think there are emergencies and there are goals, and there's a difference, right? So obviously, if your house is on fire, balancing your checkbook right that moment, while that's probably not a bad idea, it might not be the best time, right? So I understand that there's a role for emergencies, and a lot of people are in an emergency situation. So I think you have to play this game. You have to play the hand you're dealt. So you have to stabilize the situation. And I think we should have a big social discussion, and that should be the ballot. Much more than who cheated on whose wife and who shoots guns more or really goes to church instead of lies about it or whatever the things we're debating are. What do you think we should do for a couple of things that matter, right? Growth, because we do need economic growth, some sense of fairness so we have social cohesion, right? And possibly some sense of redress, right? Those would be the big ones. So obviously the pie has to grow for a host of reasons. And also, if it stagnates or shrinks, it really accentuates the fissures and divisions in the society also. So some growth is important, right? For sure. Having priorities and having those priorities materialize literally and how you use your material wealth is important. And then there's probably an issue of redress, because when people feel systematically wronged, they're likely to be very upset by all kinds of decisions that if you could offer some redress to those historic wrongs, those tensions, they'll never go away, but they can be sort of sublimated a little bit, right? If people feel like they're being seen and heard and there's some accommodation made to their historical grievances, they're usually more likely to feel part of the whole, right? And I also think we have done a terrible job of late at trying to have forces that sort of bring us together compared to the forces that pull us apart, right? And I think that's been pretty skillfully weaponized too, right? So I think there's probably very big value in having priorities and trying to find as much as possible those shared priorities. Because I actually don't think the American public, by and large, is as far apart as their representatives. On some things they are, and that's okay, but on a lot of things they're not, right? And these wedge issues control election outcomes. And people may have small numbers of people have very intense feelings on the wedge issues, but I don't think the average American thinks about them at all, right? Or very deeply. So, I mean, I think to your point about some sort of basic security of place, of health insurance, of food, of education, of infrastructure, some way or another, and they're probably defined in different terms, and maybe they're not all in the same order, those few things, those are probably the top priority for almost all Americans, right? Or, maybe they have some issue that's super important to them that's not universal, but those are going to be on their top 5, right? Whether they're 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, who knows? But they're going to be up there, right? So that's a lot of shared situation, right? But one way or another, we have to decide whether we want a small minority of people to control the system or not. Right now they do. And whether or not we're going to really cut back on our already meager public goods, or we're going to increase them. And I think the big battle, if I were not rich and or progressive, right? Folks have accused me of both, but more than a little truth, sadly, on the first and not so sadly on the second. America has to discover public goods like every other country on earth. That's public transit, that's public school, that's public health insurance, right? Public health care of some type, right? We can do it our way, but everyone else isn't wrong and we aren't right. And if we're not all lost in the illusion that we're going to become really rich, shared goods have 2 very big values. They artificially decrease inequality because everyone gets to ride the subway and everyone gets to go to the park and everyone gets to go to the same hospital when they're sick, right? So it reduces inequity, and it also is a bit uniting. The grumbles and the appreciations of the public transit or the public housing or the public education, they're shared experiences. Because the last thing about being divided and pitted against each other, the less you know other people, the less you interact intellectually and just physically in the same space with people who aren't like you, don't look like you, or don't agree with you, the easier it is for you to believe terrible things about them.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, and at the end of the day, we all rise and fall together. And, just a chain is as strong as the weakest link. That's real, everybody. That having been said, this is going to require that we examine and really understand that there is a social contract. What is it? What do you want? We're at an inflection point in America. Who are we? Who do we want to be? Dr. Max Wolf, everybody, sending you so much love. Dwight McKee, Reverend Dr. Todd Geary, Dr. Shanina Knighton, Pastor Darius Brooks, and Henry Edwards. Thank you so much for a great show. Sending you all much love. I'll see you tomorrow. Remember, Saturday, Rainbow Push, 930 East 50th Street, 2 to 7 p.m. Halloween party. Costumes required. Donations desired. Go on and be there. Let's have some fun. Love you, everybody. See you tomorrow on the Santita Jackson Show.